Your attention, masters, mistresses. All systems functional for the Everything Geek podcast.
Hey, this is Rich McDonald, and I play Commander David Mason on Call of Duty Black Ops 2. And you're listening to Everything Geek podcast.
Hey, it's James Arnold Taylor, the voice of Obi-Wan Kenobi and Master Plo Koon in Star Wars The Clone Wars, and you're listening to Everything Geek, the podcast.
Hey, it's Leif Gamfert. I played Uncle Ben's killer in The Amazing Spider-Man, and you're listening to the Everything Geek podcast.
Hello, I'm Simon Fisherbecker. You probably know me better as Dorian Moldovar from Doctor Who, or the Fat Friar from Harry Potter. And this is Everything Geek podcast.
Face it, Tiger. You just hit the jackpot with the Everything Geek podcast.
You're listening to the Everything Geek podcast, bringing you interviews from your favorite films and TV shows every week, and all of the latest news. Here's your host, Rory Williamson.
Hello everyone, you're listening to the Everything Geek podcast. I'm your host Rory, and joining me today is a very special guest. We have actor Matt Letscher, who stars as Eobard Thawne, aka Reverse Flash, in DC's Legends of Tomorrow and The Flash, Tom Bradshaw in the Carrie Diaries, Nathan Stone and Eli Stone, Rob Paley in Almost Perfect, Captain Harrison Love in The Mask of Zorro, Charles in Her, Ambassador Chris Stevens in 13 Hours, Chambers in Scandal, Alec Tyler in Brothers and Sisters, Joseph P. Kennedy in Boardwalk Empire, Henry Jenkins in Castle and Dan Coakley in Entourage. How are you today, Matt?
I'm great. That was an incredibly thorough resume listing. Thank you.
Not as thorough as the IMDb listing. I could have done more, but we might have been here, even longer, so...
Yes. Thank you very much for that kind intro.
You're very welcome. It's a pleasure to have you on the podcast today.
Pleasure to be here.
So getting right to my questions for you, Matt, just before we get into, a bit more of the juicier themes with what's happening on The Flash and Legends of Tomorrow, I just want to ask about a couple of background things before then. So first of all, can you tell us how you decided to get into acting?
Sure, yeah. Well, I started acting when I was in high school. I was probably about 15 or 16 when I auditioned for my first play. And it was really through the theater that I became interested in acting. I ended up having some really great teachers. One was in high school, and then I also studied with Uta Hagen, who is kind of a legendary American acting teacher who happened to be doing some workshops near where I lived, and sort of changed my whole perspective on what acting was and what the craft meant. Once I got on that track, there was kind of no going back. I never really thought about doing anything else, which maybe isn't the smartest way to move forward in life, but when it comes to acting, it might be the best way, not to have a plan B, to just sort of forge ahead. And that's what I've been doing ever since.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, it makes a lot of sense. I mean, acting is just something you have to throw yourself into, and it was kind of a good thing that you did, because as we were joking just a minute ago, you now have quite an extensive resume, of course. So, but it's also interesting because I heard that the reason you actually started pursuing plays or acting in general was because of a confrontation. Well, maybe not the right word, with your family.
Oh yeah, no. Yeah, that's yes. I've spoken about that before. I was just at a point in my teenage life where I was feeling pretty alone and making some pretty poor choices with regard to behavior and friends, and I basically had a what we would call a come to Jesus meeting with my parents, who said, "You know what? You need to find something a little more constructive to be doing with your time, as opposed to destructive, which is what I had been doing." And it was soon after that talk with my folks, and I don't know why I was a pretty shy kid, a pretty introspective kid, and not one for a lot of I don't know, public displays of anything. And I saw auditions for this play in my high school, and I honestly don't know why I thought of doing it, or why I thought I'd be any good at it, or why I'd even like it. But I had a strong desire to go and audition, and so I prepared, and I did, and I remember that audition very clearly, still to this day. I remember feeling very, very at home on stage, and this strong sense of, like, I know how to do this. Like, there's something in me that knows how to do this, basically. And not only do I know how to do it, but I really, really like it. And, yeah, I mean, really, while I screwed around with other stuff between then and when I supposedly formally committed to acting, the truth is, from that moment forward, I was hooked. I don't think there was any question as to what I was going to do.
Definitely, that's great. And come to Jesus meetings, if that's what you said. That sounds great. I wish I could have some of those.
Yeah, that's. I guess I could have used any number of analogies. You know, when the rubber meets the road, or something like that. But it was definitely one of those things where it was like, you know, you need to figure it out, and you need to figure it out now. So I'm grateful for that meeting. It really changed a lot of things for me.
Yeah, that's great, and I can relate to the shyness, because when I was in my early teenage years too, I used to be very shy as well, and now I'm an interviewer, so it's funny how it turns out.
Yeah, I know, that's good. Well, then you can appreciate, you know, how people sometimes have a hard time, you know, expressing themselves, so you have maybe some tolerance and some sympathy for that.
Definitely. Now, on to my next question. Just for a bit of background to being cast on The Flash, how were you originally cast as Eobard Thawne? Was it just an everyday audition?
Yeah, well, I had worked with Greg Berlanti and Andrew Kreisberg before. Andrew Kreisberg, who's the showrunner on The Flash, and Berlanti, under whose production company it's produced. I'd worked with them before on a show called Eli Stone, which I believe you mentioned in the introduction, and it only ran for 2 seasons. But it was a really amazing experience for me. It was a show that I loved, and with a cast that I loved, including Victor Garber, who is on Legends of Tomorrow. I just got a call from Andrew saying, "Hey, we want you to play this character. You know, he's coming in the first season." He gave me all the basic background of what they had been doing with the character up to that point, and what the character's place was in the canon of the Flash, and so knowing the writers I was going to be working with, and then some of the actors I was going to be working with, it was really a no-brainer. I was excited to be able to do it. So it was as simple as that, just a phone call saying we'd like you to come join us.
That's great, and it was great that you had worked with them before, so it gave you a nice sense of feeling, I guess, going into it, knowing that you were working with them again.
Exactly. Yeah. Greg Berlanti has a long track record of making excellent television, and I also knew that both Greg and Mark Guggenheim and Andrew were intimately familiar with the source material. These are guys who are very familiar with the entire DC canon and just the whole world, and so I knew that they were making every effort to respect and sort of adhere to the world, so knowing their talent, knowing their familiarity with everything, and then having worked with Tom Cavanaugh before, having worked with Victor Garber, people like that, I just felt like this is a world I feel very comfortable entering. I understand the parameters of this world, the working world, and And it's also, they're very good at creating kind of warm sets, places where people like to work. So I didn't have to worry about that. That's not always the case. So there was a lot to look forward to.
That's great. And were you familiar with the source material yourself, like the Flash comics or the character?
I was not familiar with the character, the Flash comics, a little bit, but nowhere near to the degree that these guys were. So, when we talked about the role, I just had a long, after we had agreed on a deal, I just had a long, intro to Eobard Thawne conversation with Andrew Kreisberg, who gave me the condensed version of the character and his origin and his relationship to Barry, and then talked about how they were going to use the character on, how they had been using the character and they wanted to continue using the character on the show, how it differed in ways from the comic book character, and because you can't, they obviously can't encapsulate everything about the entire canon of the Flash on the first season of a television show. It takes time to build these stories. So, there were definitely things that were just theirs, things that they had constructed for their usage about the character. So it was a long conversation, but it was really helpful, and it gave me the starting points I needed to start working.
That's really great. Now, of course, considering you're now on 2 of the DC TV shows in The Flash and Legends of Tomorrow, I'm curious, what have been the biggest challenges for you in working on The Flash originally and now working on DC's Legends of Tomorrow? What were the biggest challenges for you on both shows?
Well, the biggest challenge working on The Flash originally was trying to get a handle on, the actors talk about motivation a lot, what's motivating a character. In fact, it's a joke a lot of people use when they're talking about actors who are working, like, well, what's my motivation? And but it's very real, and it's I really had to spend some time with the character and with the source material to really try and understand what was driving Eobard beyond sort of mere psychosis, what was it initially that wanted him to become the Flash, that had him that nurtured this obsession with the Flash. And then when he understood finally that he was never going to be the Flash, what was the turning point that made him want to be the reverse of the Flash, be everything that the Flash wasn't? I mean, it's really just sort of basic, foundational, elemental stuff that as an actor you need to have figured out for yourself in order to be able to invest as much as you need to in the scenes, especially the scenes between Barry and Eobard. And then moving over to Legends, the interesting thing for me is that Legends and The Flash are very different shows. While they're both superhero shows in the DC comic universe, The Flash is a pretty intimate show, really, for all the effects and everything else. It's really a show about family. And Legends is a much bigger show. It's got a wilder quality to it that's a little more expansive. There's a larger cast. Just literally, it's bigger in that sense. And its sense of humor is a little just rowdier, it's just a little more unruly, and so, and on that show, Eobard Thawne, it doesn't have the same relationship he has on The Flash. He has that connection to Barry, and on Legends, he's working with another cast of characters, doing something quite different. So, you had to sort of figure out how you fit into this tonally very different experience for people. So. A lot of the first few episodes were spent trying to find my rhythm with that.
That makes a lot of sense, because on The Flash itself, I mean, even though there's a lot of very interesting characters in it, and as you said, it is about family, at the end of the day, it is The Flash. You know, all of the events in the show revolve around him, but Legends, it's like an ensemble, basically.
Right.
Yeah, so it's really interesting. And I have to say I'm very impressed, because you managed to actually answer two of my questions at the same time, because my next question was actually going to be the biggest differences instead of the challenges, and you actually managed to cover that too. But so I'm going to slightly change it as a result.
Okay.
But very impressive, I have to say. So just there with the challenges, you're talking more about the shows themselves, but so I'm now curious, what are the biggest differences between working with the cast and crew of both shows?
Well, there's not too many differences, because both of the shows are produced by, you know, Greg Berlanti's company. They're both on the same network. They both share the same universe, really, you know, intentionally so. And so there is a natural connection that you feel. I will say Legends is, I think Legends is probably a more difficult, they're both incredibly difficult to produce and require a lot of hours. But Legends, because of the size of the cast, and I don't know that the casual TV watcher really understands this when they're watching a show, but you've got so many characters. It is more of an ensemble show, and all these mouths need to be fed, so to speak, when it comes to screen time. That requires a much more complicated production schedule than something like The Flash does, which, like you said, sort of almost everything revolves around Barry on that show. So the organizational skills required are massive, really massive, when you've got to cast this large. And it's such an effects-heavy show, too. There's so many effect shots that really, you know, every day you're pretty much moving as fast as you can to try and cover all the material that you need to get. And one thing I do notice about, I mean, this is true of a lot of television, but Legends in particular, it's like you have to be moving quickly all the time, and once you get a certain scene set up, you're going to get maybe a couple of takes, you know, a couple of shots at that scene, and then you have to be ready to move on. So as an actor, you've got to be prepared. They don't have time to do, you know, 5, 6, 7, 10 takes of something. You have to show up and know what you're doing and know what you want to do, and be ready to nail it. So, you know, that requires a level of preparation and professionalism that, you know, everybody on that show exhibits, as far as I can tell. You know, it's definitely a labor-intensive piece.
That's really interesting to hear, because a number of shows or films in general that I watch, I do know that they do get at least a few takes to get it right. So it's really interesting. That is a bit restrictive, I guess, in a way, the number of takes that are on Legends.
Yeah, well, as an actor it is, but when you think about that show, I mean, how many, they have at least a half dozen people on board that ship at any given time, and so you have to think, if there's a scene with 6 people in it, then you have to, not only do you have to do a master shot of that scene, which includes everybody, but then you have to do 6 separate shots for everybody's, you know, I mean, I'm just doing math on your podcast, sorry, but that's doing 7 or 8 shots or setups, as they say, per scene, when you're having to reset the lights, reset the camera, focus, all kinds of stuff. That's a long time. That's a long time for what ends up being maybe not a lot of screen time. So yeah, the production schedule for Legends in that respect is much different.
It's very interesting. And for the record, it's very okay for you to do math on the podcast. I mean, if I did it, I might have actually passed my math exams. It was the only exam I failed, but so I did at least pass the others.
Well, that's good. That's good. Well, like my sons say, when am I ever going to really need to use this in real life anyway?
Exactly.
So I'm sure, I'm sure you've done just fine for yourself.
Yeah, I'm an interviewer. I don't need math to do interviews.
No.
Anyway, getting back on track. Eobard's motivation on The Flash has always been simply to take down Barry Allen. Is it safe to say that it's still his motivation while he's on Legends of Tomorrow, and that he's kind of playing a long game in his attempt to take Barry down?
Yeah, it's safe to say in the sense that the Eobard Thawne you see on Legends of Tomorrow is the same Eobard Thawne from The Flash, and so, and his purpose on Legends, or what's driving him on Legends, yes, is the same thing that's driving him on The Flash, and so everything that's been set up for the character so far on The Flash still applies when we're talking about Legends of Tomorrow. So, yeah.
Okay, that's a very nice answer. Now, in the Flash Season 3 premiere episode Flashpoint, Eobard views himself as a hero in the episode after Barry asks him to fix the timeline, even having a quote where he says as such, "Now I get to be a hero," or something like that. What was the experience?
Right.
What was the experience like portraying Eobard in the Season 3 premiere, and do you think he really viewed himself as a hero in that instance?
Well, first of all, yeah, being in the season premiere, being in, the start of Flashpoint, or, their version of Flashpoint, was thrilling. I thought it was really well written. I always love working with Grant. I think he's terrific, and I feel like our scenes, have a nice resonance. So that all was really exciting for me. In terms of him seeing himself as the hero, I think what Eobard recognizes is that there is that there's a duality in everybody, right? And he approached his journey by wanting to be the Flash. He, once he discovered the Flash, once he discovered Barry Allen, he wanted to be that person, which means he wanted to be a hero. And when he found out he was not going to be that, he wanted to become everything that was the reverse of that, hence the Reverse Flash. So there exists within Eobard this great capacity to both admire and love Barry Allen and the Flash, and also despise and want to eradicate Barry Allen and the Flash. And I think both of those things existing within the same person tells Eobard that the nature of heroism is very much dependent on circumstance, it's very much dependent on context. And that's what I would say. In as much as he views himself or anyone as a hero, he always views it through that lens. Does that make sense?
Yeah, that makes perfect sense. That's a really great and interesting answer. Thank you for that.
Sure, yeah. No, I think that's at the heart of Eobard's conundrum. And Eobard's Conundrum, that should be the title of the next novel that I write. But it's, I think it's something that for me is really useful to think about when it comes to approaching the work.
Definitely. Now, do I get a free-signed copy of the book?
Absolutely, for sure. You'll probably get co-credit, considering I thought of it here.
Yeah, thank you so much.
Sure.
Now, my final question for you, Matt. Do you have any upcoming acting roles or any other projects that you would like to talk about outside of The Flash and Legends?
Oh, that's nice of you to ask. I mean, this year is mostly consumed with The Flash and Legends, which is nice. There is one thing that I did that I like to talk about from time to time because it's a small project and it's something that I produced on my own. It's a web series that I released last year called One and Done, and it's about a group of friends from high school who were all on the same basketball team. That are now in their mid-40s, and they decided to reform that high school basketball team and enter a highly competitive tournament, which of course is a massive mistake because they're way too old for that. But it's, a story about people coming back together after having drifted apart. It's a story about aging and what it means, especially physically for people, for men. And anyway, it is something I wrote and directed and did with some friends of mine. It's called One and Done, and if anybody wants to see it, it's posted on its website, oneanddoneshow.com. It's about 90 minutes of material, 7 episodes, and it's something I'm really proud of. So go check it out if basketball or comedy or any of that stuff appeals to you.
I'll definitely be sure to give it a look. Now, before I let you go, Matt, because we do still have a few more minutes of our scheduled time, one of my co-hosts, Joel, left a few questions. Unfortunately, he couldn't be here, but I'm going to read out his questions for him, if you don't mind.
Oh, go ahead.
So, first of all, he wanted to know, how long before shooting on the second season of The Flash did you know that Season 2 would tell his origin story?
I didn't. I didn't. They don't give me any information. So, like, I get this. I basically know a little bit ahead of when the fans know, and I'm not really even sure we have fully explored Eobard's origin story to the extent that it is out there. I feel like that's still a story to be told, perhaps in future seasons. We'll see.
Well, I can look forward to learning more about him then, if that's what you're teasing.
Well, I'm not teasing it because I haven't gotten it. I'm just hoping that it does happen at some point.
Well, it's good to hope for things. I mean, good things come to those who wait, or whatever.
That's right.
I'm not even sure that saying applies here, but that was the first saying that came to mind. Yeah.
We'll have a come to Jesus meeting about it and figure out what the right saying is.
Yeah, exactly. But the best kind of meeting to have, that's for sure. That's one thing I've learned from this interview. Well, I mean, I've learned a lot, but that's the most important thing.
Okay, good.
Well, I say that because I'm a Quaker, and they're peaceful people. We like worshipping Jesus, so I can now tell people there's such a thing as a come to Jesus meeting. And I learnt it from a villain.
Right.
Well,
a complicated villain. A villain with two sides to him. Let's put it that way.
Yeah, exactly. I know you're not actually a villain, which is good. But
that is a good thing.
Definitely. Now, Joel's second question. How long before shooting on the second season of Legends of Tomorrow did you know that you would be part of the Legion of Doom?
I knew the second they called and said, when they called with the offer to say we want you to be a regular on Legends of Tomorrow, they pitched this whole idea of the Legion of Doom. They basically told me what the storyline would be and who I would be working with to do that. So we're on episode 8 right now, and it's slowly come together just as they said it would over the course of the season. So it was all laid out to me ahead of time, and it's working out nicely.
It's very nice. And Joel's final question, this is a bit of a tricky one, so you might have to think about it a little bit. If you
Okay.
could play any character in either the DC Cinematic Universe or the Marvel Cinematic Universe, who would it be and why?
Oh, that is a tricky one because there's so many. I mean, you know, one of the first impulses is to say somebody, you know, somebody iconic, somebody truly iconic, right? Like who've had a million people do it, like Batman or something, where you've got such a wealth of backstory and motivation that you know there's so much to play with. But the downside to that is there's also so many people who have already done Batman so well that your Batman inevitably, it's like doing Hamlet, right? It inevitably ends up getting compared to other Batmans. And so maybe you'd want to pick something, you know, something like what Benedict Cumberbatch has done and say like Doctor Strange, something that we've never seen before. I would tend to veer towards, and then the other thing you have to think about is what are they going to ask me to do physically if I say I want to be this character? So if I say Aquaman, then I'm going to be spending a lot of time in the water while we're shooting. Do I want to spend that much time in the water? So there's a lot of factors at play here. I would probably say Batman for the same reasons I would say Hamlet. You know, if somebody asked me, you know, what character would you want to play in all of literature? Because there's so much in that character that is iconic, that is like sort of that is basic you know, an understanding of like basic human suffering and existence, and you have pain, you have death, you have revenge, you have all these rich states to deal with, and then all the ancillary characters too are so well known and so rich, and so, you know, if I had to say that, I would say Batman equals Hamlet.
It's a really great answer. Yeah, now people are going to start comparing Batman and Hamlet. I don't know what they'll get from that, but I really like the way you answered that, though.
Thanks.
Yeah, it really was a great way of explaining why it won't be good to be Batman, as well as saying you want to be Batman, just because people will compare you to other Batmans.
Yeah. I mean, it's true, though, and you see it happen all the time. Even with the most recent incarnation, you know, there's inevitably, there's going to be a comparison made. So you have to just be able to live with that.
Definitely. So that's all of my questions for you today, Matt. It's been a pleasure talking to you on the podcast.
And you as well. Thanks so much for having me.
You're very welcome, and hopefully I can talk to you again at some point.
Sounds good. Anytime.
Great, so I'll talk to you again soon. Thanks again for joining us, and take care. Bye.
Take care. Bye.
So that was our interview with actor Matt Letscher. I hope you enjoyed listening to it. Definitely a lot of interesting material from this interview, that's for sure. So time to wrap up today's show. The Flash airs on the CW on Tuesdays at 8/7 Central, and DC's Legends of Tomorrow airs on Thursdays at 8/7 Central, the same time. Yeah, and I apologise, I meant to say that before I said wrapping up, so now it is indeed time to wrap up today's show. We'll have to edit that, because of my slight slip-up. So yeah, make sure to check out our podcast links. Check out our website, www.everythinggeekpodcast.com/EGP. Check out our Facebook page, www.facebook.com/everythinggeekpodcast. Check out our YouTube channel, www.youtube.com/user/everythinggeekcast. Check us out on Twitter, twitter.com/everythinggeekp. Check us out on Instagram, instagram.com/official Everything Geek podcast. Check out our Mixcloud profile, www.mixcloud.com/everythinggeekpodcast. Email us at the following email, everythinggeekpodcast@gmail.com. Check out our companion podcast, Everything Geek Comic Cast, www.facebook.com/everythinggeekcomiccast. Make sure to check out the hosts' YouTube channels. Mine is www.youtube.com/user/Separatist Check out Matt Letscher on Twitter, twitter.com/Matt Letscher, and check out channel 1138 where we broadcast live from, www.channel1138.com. Geeks out, everyone.
All of last season I was sort of just waiting and hoping and, expecting it to happen. And so when this finally happened, I was absolutely ecstatic. It was one of the best.
Secondly, it just feels so appropriate that our worlds should collide. And so, when we started it, our producers and writers are so aware of how close Robin and I are off camera.